The sun had barely lifted over the horizon when the cadets were assembled on the firing range, their polished rifles gleaming under the pale light of morning. The air was sharp with the smell of oil and gunpowder, and the rhythmic sound of boots scraping against gravel carried the restless energy of young soldiers eager to prove themselves. Among them stood Elena, her stance slightly different, her weapon noticeably out of place. While the others carried the latest precision rifles issued by the Academy, sleek, modern, and intimidating, she held in her hands an aging bolt-action rifle, its wooden stock scarred by time and its barrel dulled by years of service. The weapon looked as if it belonged in a museum rather than in the hands of a trainee, and it didn't take long for whispers and laughter to ripple through the line. "She's going to use that antique?" one of the cadets sneered under his breath, though loud enough for others to hear. "Might as well throw rocks instead." A few chuckles followed, the kind that sting because they are sharp with cruelty. Elena kept her gaze forward, her expression calm, though her grip on the rifle tightened. She had grown up with this weapon, learning its quirks, its weight, and its rhythm long before she had ever dreamed of joining the Academy. To her it wasn't just a rifle. It was a piece of her father, who had taught her to shoot with patience and precision in the quiet woods of their home. The rifle had history and she carried that history with her. But to the others it was nothing more than a relic, a joke waiting to unfold. The instructor, a grizzled veteran with scars that spoke of battles fought long before any of them were born, barked out the commands. Positions. Targets set at 800 meters. Show me if you belong here or if you're wasting my time. His voice was like gravel dragged across steel, and it carried the weight of absolute authority. The cadets dropped to their stomachs, rifles leveled, scopes adjusted, breaths measured. The sleek rifles clicked and hummed with modern efficiency, their owners brimming with confidence. Elena slid into her position at the far end of the line, ignoring the stares. She pressed the worn wood of the rifle into her shoulder, her cheek finding its familiar rest. The metal was cold against her skin, but it was a cold she trusted. The first volley of shots cracked across the range, echoing like thunderclaps against the hills. Targets shuddered, some snapping under the impact, others standing untouched. The cadets murmured and cursed, some pleased with their marksmanship, others frustrated. Elena had not yet fired. She inhaled deeply, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat, shutting out the noise around her. The bolt slid back with a metallic snap, the cartridge slid home, and the bolt closed with a satisfying click. Through her iron sights, no digital scopes, no rangefinders, she studied the target. The world narrowed to a single point in the distance. Her fingers squeezed the trigger gently, almost lovingly, and the rifle roared. The bullet flew, invisible to the naked eye, but the result was clear. The target center erupted with a neat, perfect hole. There was silence for a moment, then laughter, not mocking this time but surprised, disbelieving. "Lucky shot," someone muttered, unwilling to admit what they had just seen. Elena did not flinch at the comment. She chambered another round with smooth, practiced ease, her movements steady and deliberate. Again she took her time, while others rushed to prove themselves, their shots scattering across the targets like chaotic brushstrokes. Her second shot struck true, another clean mark dead center. The instructor's eyes, sharp and unyielding, lingered on her now. He didn't smile, didn't comment, but his silence carried a weight that the others could feel. Elena continued, each shot deliberate, each breath measured. Where others fired rapidly, eager to display speed and aggression, she moved with patience, as if each bullet carried meaning beyond the competition. One by one her rounds found their home, center after center, while the line of cadets began to falter. Sweat gathered on their brows, frustration tightening their jaws. Their modern rifles, so advanced and finely tuned, suddenly seemed less reliable in comparison to the old bolt action that sang with precision in Elena's hands. By the end of the round, the difference was undeniable. While many targets were riddled with scattered holes, her target looked almost artistic. Each mark clustered in a group so tight it seemed impossible. Whispers ran down the line, no longer mocking but edged with something else, respect or perhaps fear. The cadet who had mocked her the loudest earlier avoided her gaze now, his own target a mess of poorly grouped shots. Elena finally sat back, lowering the rifle, exhaling the tension she had carried silently. She didn't need to look at the others. She had felt every shot, known each one had found its mark. The old rifle rested across her lap, heavy but familiar, its wood scarred but proud. The instructor finally spoke, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Marks don't lie. Equipment doesn't win battles, skill does." His gaze shifted down the line and settled on Elena. For the briefest moment, there was something in his eyes, acknowledgement, perhaps even admiration, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Reset for the next drill. Targets at 1,000 meters. The cadets groaned softly. At that distance, even their advanced optics would be tested. But Elena only adjusted her grip, her calm unshaken. She had grown up shooting across valleys and ridges, where the wind shifted like a living thing and distances blurred into haze. 1,000 meters was not impossible, it was home. She slid another round into the chamber, the metallic sound like a steady heartbeat. This was only the beginning. The air grew heavier as the targets were moved farther downrange, small silhouettes now barely visible against the shimmer of morning heat. 1,000 meters was a distance that tested even seasoned marksmen, and for cadets, it was a chance to expose weakness or prove strength. The line of trainees settled back into their positions, adjusting their scopes and muttering to themselves, trying to steady nerves and steady hands. Elena at the far end, once again prepared her rifle with a quiet, methodical rhythm, ignoring the side glances and skeptical whispers. Her focus had narrowed, her mind slipping into that calm state her father used to call the quiet between heartbeats. She had learned long ago that shooting was not about force or speed, it was about stillness, patience, and trust. A strong breeze swept across the range, the kind that sent grass bending in waves. It carried with it the smell of earth and dust, a reminder that no shot was ever fired in perfect conditions. Many cadets frowned, adjusting windage dials on their scopes, whispering calculations under their breath. Elena had no dial to turn, no electronics to guide her. She lifted a small piece of cloth tied to the end of her rifle's barrel and watched how it fluttered. Her father had taught her that trick: read the wind with your eyes, feel its rhythm with your skin. The rifle was not separate from the world around it, it was part of it. The instructor gave the order, his voice cutting across the range. Fire when ready. Immediately the sharp reports of modern rifles cracked through the air, dozens of bullets screaming downrange. Cadets rushed to get their shots off, competing with one another for speed and accuracy. Elena, however, did not rush. She lay still, eyes narrowed on the distant target, watching how the wind shifted across the ground. She let her breathing slow, her heart calm, until the world seemed to still itself around her. The rifle rose and fell gently with her breath, her finger resting on the trigger but unmoving. Then as the wind shifted just so, she squeezed. The rifle barked, the recoil pushing gently into her shoulder, and the bullet flew. At this distance, the flight felt like an eternity. Her eyes never left the target. A faint clang rang out across the valley, the sound of steel kissed by lead. A direct hit. Those nearest to her stopped shooting just long enough to look down the line in disbelief. No scope, no digital guidance, no modern modifications. Yet her shot had struck home with the precision of a machine. Elena calmly chambered another round, already reading the wind for the next. Meanwhile, frustration spread among the cadets. Their scopes, meant to simplify the art of sniping, seemed to betray them now. Some overshot, their bullets whining into the dirt beyond the targets, while others landed short. The instructor walked behind them, his boots crunching against gravel, his silence pressing down like judgment. Every miss was recorded in his mind, every mistake noted. When he reached Elena's position, he stopped. She was steady, her body perfectly aligned, her breathing so controlled it looked as if she had become part of the ground itself. He said nothing, only watched as she fired again. Another hit. The murmurs grew louder. No one could ignore her performance now. Each shot was measured, deliberate, and devastatingly accurate. Her groupings were tight, her hits consistent, while the others floundered in uncertainty. The cadet who had laughed the loudest earlier cursed under his breath, his scope fogged with frustration as much as with breath. He had missed 3 in a row, and every clang of Elena's rifle against steel twisted the knife of humiliation deeper. By the time the round was called, the results were undeniable. Elena had scored more hits at 1,000 meters with her old rifle than most of the team combined with their modern weapons. The instructor finally broke his silence. "This," he said, pointing toward her target, "is what discipline looks like. Tools may change, technology may evolve, but skill never lies." His voice carried the weight of truth, and no one dared laugh now. Elena did not look for their approval, but she could feel the shift. The line between mockery and respect was thin, and she had crossed it with every shot. Yet respect is a dangerous thing in a place built on competition. When the cadets broke for a brief rest, groups clustered together, muttering in hushed tones. Some looked at her with admiration, others with bitterness. The loudest among them approached, his jaw tight, his pride wounded. "Don't think one lucky round makes you special," he spat, though even he knew his words rang hollow. Elena met his glare with calm eyes, her rifle cradled in her arms like something sacred. She didn't answer him because she didn't need to. The results on the range spoke louder than any insult ever could. The instructor blew the whistle again, announcing the next challenge. This time the targets would be moving, simulating enemies on the battlefield. It was the test most dreaded, for even the best marksman could falter when precision was combined with unpredictability. The cadets groaned, knowing the difficulty ahead. But Elena's pulse did not quicken. She remembered the times her father had tied bottles to strings in the woods, letting the wind swing them unpredictably, forcing her to adjust and react. She remembered how he had told her, "Life doesn't give you still targets. Learn to read motion like you read wind." She had thought it a game then. Now she understood it had been preparation. As the steel silhouettes began to move downrange, jerking side to side on wires, the cadets once again raised their modern rifles. Some rushed, firing too quickly, their shots sparking harmlessly against the dirt. Others hesitated, trying to calculate too much, missing their opportunities. Elena steadied herself, eyes locked onto the swaying target. She breathed, calculated, waited for the rhythm in the chaos. When it came, she squeezed. The target jolted, struck squarely, a clang ringing across the range. One by one she repeated the process, her old rifle singing with deadly precision. The murmurs this time were louder, filled not with disbelief but with awe. Even the instructor's stern mask cracked, the faintest glimmer of approval flickering in his eyes. Elena lowered her rifle at last, her breaths calm, her face expressionless. Inside, though, she carried a quiet fire, the fire of proving not to them but to herself that she belonged. The day stretched on, the sun climbing higher, and with it the pressure on every cadet's shoulders. Sweat glistened on brows, rifles grew hot beneath relentless use, and tempers simmered just beneath the surface. The range had become less of a training ground and more of a battlefield of pride, where every hit and every miss carried weight heavier than the rifles themselves. For Elena, the rhythm of the drills had settled into something familiar, almost meditative. She no longer heard the mutters, the doubts, or even the grudging respect that had started to replace earlier mockery. She heard only her own breath, the click of the bolt sliding into place, and the sharp crack of her rifle echoing across the range. But the instructors were not satisfied with mere marksmanship. They believed that snipers were more than shooters, they were hunters, ghosts, unseen predators who had to master more than hitting a target. So when the whistle shrieked again, the order given was different. The cadets were to engage in concealment and field movement, crawling across uneven terrain toward targets hidden in the hills while avoiding detection from spotters. It was a test of stealth, patience, and mental endurance. The rifles were no longer the only tools. Now every rustle of fabric, every misplaced hand, every clink of metal could mean failure. The cadets groaned, adjusting their gear. Most had uniforms freshly pressed and camouflage nets carefully prepared. Elena, by contrast, had none of the expensive modifications. Her uniform was standard issue, her camouflage simple mud and foliage gathered on site. Some smirked at her as they tied synthetic covers over their rifles, mocking the bare wood and iron of hers. But when the whistle blew and they hit the dirt, all laughter was swallowed by silence. The game had begun. Elena pressed herself low against the earth, moving like water seeping across the ground. Every motion was deliberate, every pause meaningful. She listened to the sound of the wind, the shifting of grass, even the call of distant birds, letting them mask her movements. The cadets around her tried to move quickly, eager to impress by reaching the firing points first, but in their haste they rustled branches, clinked metal, disturbed the natural rhythm of the field. From the observation tower, spotters marked each mistake, calling them out with a merciless efficiency. Cadet 4 exposed. Cadet 7 movement detected. Cadet 10 sound signature too high. One by one names were called. Each mistake was a strike against them, their pride crumbling with every slip. Elena, however, remained uncalled. She moved slowly, patiently, letting the earth shield her. The mud on her face blurred her features, the leaves woven into her helmet broke her outline. Her rifle, though unadorned, blended naturally with the ground, its wood almost indistinguishable from fallen branches. She was not fast, but she was unseen, and in this test, unseen was victory. When she finally reached her firing position, nestled behind a ridge of stone and brush, she settled in with a calm that came from years of practice. Her father had taken her hunting in the wild, not for sport, but to teach her patience, teaching her that sometimes the longest waits yielded the greatest results. She lay still for minutes that stretched into what felt like hours, her eyes fixed on the silhouette of the target partially hidden between rocks. Through iron sights she studied it, adjusted for wind, and waited for the perfect moment. When she fired, the sound was a whisper compared to the roar of the modern rifles that had rushed their shots earlier. The target jerked, struck dead center. The spotters raised their binoculars, scanning, searching for the shooter. For several long moments they could not find her. It was only when she chose to move that her position was reluctantly revealed, but by then, the shot had been made. In the review the difference was undeniable. Many cadets had failed to remain concealed, their eagerness betraying them. Some had fired inaccurately, their shots scattering wide of the target. Elena's score, however, was nearly perfect. Her concealment effective, her patience unshaken, her accuracy flawless. The instructors exchanged glances, their faces unreadable, but their silence was heavy with meaning. Among the cadets the mood shifted again. Where before there had been laughter, now there was a growing unease. Respect had begun to turn into something sharper. Envy? The boy who had mocked her at the start clenched his fists, his pride bleeding out with every comparison. It was not supposed to be this way. She was supposed to fail, to crumble under the weight of her old rifle, to prove their superiority by her weakness. Instead she had made them look inadequate. At dinner that evening in the mess hall, the conversations were hushed. Groups huddled at tables, whispering about the day's results. Elena sat alone, quietly eating, her rifle resting in the storage rack nearby. She had no need for company, no desire for approval. But she felt the weight of their stares, some grudgingly respectful, others hostile. She could sense the storm gathering around her, not of failure, but of resentment. Excellence, she knew, was often lonelier than mediocrity. Later that night, as she cleaned her rifle in silence, she thought of her father again. His voice echoed in her memory, "A rifle is only as strong as the hands that carry it. And a sniper is only as strong as the patience they hold." She smiled faintly, running the cloth along the scarred wooden stock, feeling every groove and dent as though they were part of her own story. Tomorrow would bring another test, another chance to prove that skill outweighed equipment, discipline outweighed arrogance. And she was ready. Because for Elena, every shot was not just a bullet downrange, it was a reminder that even the oldest tools in the right hands could carve legends. Morning came with a cool breeze and the sharp call of the bugle, pulling the cadets from their bunks before the sun had fully painted the sky. The previous day's trials lingered in their minds, bruising some egos and inflating others, but for Elena it was simply another step forward. She woke early as she always did, and prepared her rifle with the same reverence she had shown since her first day. The others glanced at her in the barracks, some with grudging acknowledgement, others with concealed bitterness, but she ignored them. A weapon, she believed, was not a symbol to be flaunted, but a tool to be respected. When they assembled on the training ground, the instructor's expression was darker than usual, as though today's test carried a greater weight. "Snipers," he barked, his voice booming across the ranks, "do not live on the range. Your work begins where others end, deep in the field, unseen, unsupported, with nothing but your skill to keep you alive. Today you will face a simulation. Targets will be spread across 2 kilometers of terrain. Your task is simple: move, find, and eliminate. You will be scored not only on accuracy but on time, concealment, and endurance. Fail and you may as well pack your bags." A murmur ran through the cadets. This was no longer about simple marksmanship. It was about survival, awareness, and stamina. 2 kilometers of rough terrain was punishing enough, but doing it under observation while expected to deliver precise shots made it a true ordeal. The cadets shouldered their rifles and set out in staggered groups, determination and nerves etched into their faces. Elena adjusted her strap, the old rifle heavy but familiar against her back, and slipped into the field with quiet resolve. The terrain was unforgiving: rolling hills, dense patches of brush, sudden drops of earth where streams had carved through stone. Every step had to be measured, every sound suppressed. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing down like an invisible weight, but Elena moved with calm efficiency. While others tried to rush, stumbling and drawing the eyes of spotters, she flowed from cover to cover, blending with the landscape as though she belonged to it. The mud on her face had dried and cracked, giving her the look of stone itself. Her rifle's worn wood seemed like just another branch when pressed against the ground. Hours passed. Some cadets grew restless, their impatience betraying them. Spotters' voices echoed across the valley as they called out mistakes. Cadet 6, exposed on the ridge. Cadet 9, sound detected in the brush. With every name called, the pool of competitors shrank. Elena's name was never spoken. She moved like a shadow, her progress slow but sure. Her patience, once mocked, was now her greatest weapon. At last she reached her first designated firing position. Through the sight she scanned the valley. The target was partially hidden, a steel silhouette tucked between rocks, painted to blend with the terrain. For many cadets, it would have been nearly invisible. But Elena's eyes were trained to find what didn't belong, the unnatural shape, the faint glint of paint against stone. She steadied her breath, adjusted for the slight crosswind and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked and a distant clang answered. Another mark in her favor. She didn't linger. The test wasn't about one shot, it was about many across a grueling course. She slipped from cover to cover, crawling, climbing, sometimes waiting long stretches for the spotter's gaze to pass before moving again. At one point she lay perfectly still for nearly half an hour, face pressed against the dirt, as an instructor scanned the hillside with binoculars. The insects crawled over her arms, the sun baked her skin, but she did not move. When the danger passed, she resumed, unfazed. By the time she reached her final firing point, exhaustion weighed heavy on the cadets. Some had abandoned concealment altogether, desperate to finish. Their shots rang out clumsily, missing more often than not. Elena, though weary, remained composed. Her target was the farthest of all, a figure barely visible against the shimmer of heat at the edge of the valley. She lined up her shot, adjusted for distance, and let the world narrow to that single point. Her finger squeezed, the rifle thundered, and when the sound reached back across the valley, the steel target swayed with the impact. A perfect hit. When the simulation ended, the cadets gathered at the base of the hill, their uniforms streaked with mud, their faces drawn with fatigue. The instructor read the scores in a clipped, uncompromising tone. One by one, names were called, their results announced, some barely passing, others failing outright. Then he came to Elena. "Cadet Elena," he said, his eyes flicking from the clipboard to her face. "Highest score of the group. Perfect concealment. All targets struck." A stunned silence fell over the cadets. The boy who had mocked her most stood stiff, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Pride battled with humiliation on his face, but he said nothing. The others, though silent, could not deny the truth. She had surpassed them all, not with new equipment or expensive gear, but with patience, skill, and the unshakable bond she shared with her old rifle. That night, back in the barracks, she cleaned her weapon in silence, the soft scrape of the cloth the only sound in the dim room. Her hands moved with care, tracing each scar on the rifle's stock, polishing the metal until it gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Around her, cadets shifted uncomfortably, some stealing glances, others avoiding her gaze altogether. She knew she had changed something that day. She had proven that strength was not in what you carried but in how you carried it. And though her path was lonelier now, it was also clearer. For Elena, the old rifle was not a burden. It was her voice, her legacy, her weapon. And through it, she had carved her place, not at the edge of the team, but at its very peak. The following week, the academy shifted its focus from training grounds to live exercises in the field. No longer confined to ranges and simulations, the cadets were taken deep into the wilderness, where terrain and unpredictability became their greatest enemies. The instructors wasted no time in making the point clear. A sniper was not measured solely by marksmanship, but by endurance, adaptability, and the ability to outthink both the enemy and the environment. It was the crucible where the weak broke and the strong were tempered. For Elena, it was familiar ground. They were dropped at dawn, miles away from their objectives, and ordered to move in pairs across rough, mountainous terrain to locate and strike hidden targets. Supplies were limited, rations were scarce. The cadets were expected to rely on wit and discipline as much as they relied on their rifles. Elena was assigned no partner. Whether it was a deliberate test from the instructors or a result of the others' refusal to team with her, she did not ask. She simply accepted it as she accepted everything, with quiet determination. Her rifle, slung across her shoulder, felt heavier than ever, but the weight was comforting, like the familiar pull of gravity. As the teams dispersed into the hills, the landscape swallowed them whole. Jagged ridges, dense thickets, and long stretches of barren rock stretched endlessly. The heat rose quickly, the kind that clawed at lungs and blurred vision. Elena moved methodically, conserving her strength. While others charged ahead in eagerness, leaving trails of broken branches and disturbed earth, she blended into the terrain, her pace steady, her movements careful. By midday, many cadets were already drained, their canteens half empty, their uniforms soaked in sweat. Elena pressed forward, every step deliberate, her eyes scanning for signs of movement. The first target was hidden in the shadow of a rocky outcrop, painted in camouflage that would have fooled most eyes. She found it not by sight alone but by listening, the faint clink of a chain swaying in the breeze, attached to the steel silhouette. She crouched low, brought her rifle to bear and adjusted for distance. Through iron sights she locked onto the outline that barely rose from the stone. She inhaled, exhaled and fired. The distant clang echoed, confirming her strike. Without hesitation she melted back into cover, leaving no trace. Other cadets, she learned later, had failed at that same target. Some had never seen it, others had taken wild shots and given away their positions. She moved on, her pace slow but relentless. At one point she crawled across a stretch of open ground so exposed it felt like a spotlight was on her back. But she moved with such patience, an inch at a time, pausing for minutes between motions, that even the instructors with binoculars struggled to pinpoint her location. By the second day, exhaustion was etched into every cadet's face. Blisters, dehydration and sheer mental strain had begun to take their toll. 2 had already been pulled from the exercise for injuries. Yet Elena carried on, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She drew strength from the quiet memory of her father's lessons. Nights spent lying under the stars with nothing but the old rifle across her chest, listening to the forest breathe. She had endured worse silences than this, longer waits, harsher conditions. For her this was not punishment. It was simply the way of things. The second target was harder, moving along a rail line in the valley below. Other cadets rushed shots at it, their bullets kicking up dust and stone as the target swung past. Elena lay prone on the ridge watching. She studied the rhythm, the sway, the pauses in its motion. Only when she could predict its arc did she fire. Her bullet struck true, the target clanging as it spun violently. The instructors marked her score silently, their pens scratching across clipboards, their expressions unreadable. By the final day, only a handful of cadets remained in contention, their scores balanced between success and failure. The last objective was the most difficult, a target hidden in dense woodland, placed nearly 2 kilometers from the cadets' starting point. The journey itself was grueling, forcing them to climb steep ridges and crawl through thorn-choked gullies. Many faltered. Some quit outright, collapsing from fatigue. Elena pressed forward, every step fueled not by pride but by purpose. When she reached the woodland, dusk had already begun to settle. The light was fading, shadows stretching long and uncertain. She knelt, scanning the darkness for signs of the final target. The woods were alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the cries of unseen animals, but her ears picked out something different, the faint metallic creak of a plate swaying in the breeze. She followed the sound, low to the ground, moving with the patience of a predator. Finally she saw it, a steel silhouette half buried in brush, nearly invisible in the gloom. Her muscles ached, her vision blurred from strain, but her hands were steady as she lifted the rifle. The old wood pressed against her cheek, the iron sights framing the target in the dim light. She steadied her breathing, let the silence fill her and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the dusk, and the metallic clang of impact answered her across the forest. She exhaled, lowering the weapon, her heart calm. It was done. When the cadets were called back to camp, the scores were tallied. Many had failed. Others had scraped by with barely enough to pass. Elena once again stood at the top. The instructor read her results without flourish, but his voice carried weight. Cadet Elena. All objectives complete. Highest endurance score. Flawless accuracy. The silence among the others was heavy. Some looked away in shame, others in bitterness. But none could deny it, she had outlasted them, outshot them and outthought them. That night, as she sat by the small fire at the edge of camp, cleaning her rifle in the dim glow, she felt no triumph. Only a quiet certainty settled in her chest. She had proven what she already knew, that strength was not measured by the shine of one's weapon, but by the resolve in one's heart. And though the others might hate her for it, respect her for it, or both, she carried no resentment. She carried only the old rifle and the lessons it had etched into her soul. The weeks that followed forged the cadets into something harder, leaner, and far more aware of their limits. But for Elena, every new challenge only deepened the divide between her and the rest of the group. By now, no one mocked her rifle openly. Those days were gone, burned away by her consistency and skill, but resentment had taken root in silence. Respect had been won, yes, but it was grudging and in some corners poisoned by envy. A few cadets avoided her, unwilling to face the sting of comparison. Others watched her closely, measuring themselves against her, always finding themselves wanting. Only the instructors remained steady, their judgments delivered without favoritism, though their eyes lingered on her longer than before, as if weighing the question of what she might become. One morning the cadets were summoned to the operations hall, where the walls were lined with maps and the air hummed with a tension different from the usual drills. The lead instructor stepped forward, a stack of folders in hand, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Today you will participate in a team exercise," he announced. "This is not about individual skill. This is about coordination, communication, and strategy. A sniper is nothing if they cannot function as part of a greater unit." He paused, his tone sharpening. "You will be divided into 2 teams. Each team will attempt to capture a position defended by the other. Success depends on your ability to outmaneuver, outthink, and outshoot your opponents." The cadets shifted uneasily. For weeks, everything had been measured by their individual performance. Now they would have to rely on one another to trust and cooperate. For some, it was a relief. For Elena, it was a different kind of trial. She knew already that trust was fragile and, in her case, fractured. Many still viewed her with suspicion, uncertain if her presence was a gift or a burden. When the teams were named, she found herself placed with several cadets who had once mocked her the loudest, including the boy whose pride had been most bruised by her successes. His jaw tightened when her name was called, but he said nothing. The exercise began at dusk. Each team took to the field, one tasked with defending a hilltop position, the other tasked with capturing it. Elena's team was on the offensive. They moved cautiously through the twilight, their uniforms blending into the deepening shadows. Tension hung in the air, every snapped twig or shifted stone echoing louder than it should. Elena kept to the rear, her rifle ready, her eyes scanning the ridges and trees for signs of the enemy. The boy leading their unit barked quiet orders, his voice edged with the desire to prove himself. He pointed her toward the left flank. "Cover that side," he whispered. "And try not to give us away with that relic." She didn't answer. She simply nodded and slipped into the darkness, moving low and quiet until the sounds of her team faded behind her. The woods embraced her like an old friend, the earth familiar beneath her palms, the silence a comfort rather than a burden. Through the branches, she saw faint glimmers of light on the hilltop where the other team had taken position. She slowed, watching, listening, reading the rhythms of their defense. They were young, eager, and restless. Their movements betrayed them. When the first shot cracked from the hill, her team scattered, diving for cover. The defenders had spotted their approach. Chaos rippled through the unit as orders turned to shouts and confusion. But Elena remained calm. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, sighting the flash of movement among the rocks above. One breath, one squeeze, and her shot rang out. A clang answered as a defender's target plate swung, signaling his elimination. Her teammates, startled, looked her way. For a moment, the boy who had doubted her seemed to hesitate, caught between pride and the reality of her accuracy. Then he shouted, suppressing fire, and tried to rally the others. They fired wildly, bullets scattering across the hillside, drawing return fire from above. Elena ignored their frenzy. She moved with purpose, repositioning, finding new angles. Every shot she took was deliberate, every target struck. Slowly the defenders' numbers thinned. Still the fight was far from easy. The defenders were entrenched, and every meter of ground gained came at the cost of sweat and bruises. The boy in charge grew reckless, ordering charges that forced the team into exposed positions. Twice they nearly lost everything, pinned down by crossfire. Both times Elena's steady shots carved openings, eliminating defenders that had them trapped. Her old rifle spoke with authority, a reminder that precision could achieve what brute force could not. At last, as the night deepened and the battle dragged on, the hilltop was theirs. The defenders' final targets were struck, their positions overrun. Elena emerged from the shadows, her face streaked with dirt, her rifle steady in her hands. The boy stood at the crest, chest heaving, pride warring with the knowledge that their victory had hinged not on his orders, but on her patience and skill. When they returned to camp, the instructors debriefed them. The defenders were praised for their resilience, the attackers for their persistence. But one fact was impossible to ignore: the attacking team's success had been carried by Elena's precision. "Cadet Elena," the lead instructor said, his tone steady but weighty, "you demonstrated once again that skill and discipline turn the tide of battle. But remember, no sniper stands alone. Even the best must learn to work within the team they are given." The words struck her more deeply than she expected. She had fought alone for so long, trusting only herself and her rifle, that the idea of relying on others felt almost alien. Yet she could not deny the truth. A sniper might fire alone, but wars were never won by a single bullet. That night, she sat apart from the others, her rifle across her lap as she cleaned it by lantern light. She could feel the shift in the air. Some cadets looked at her differently now, less with envy and more with grudging acceptance. But others still clung to bitterness, their pride unwilling to bend. She knew her journey was not about their approval, nor their scorn. It was about becoming the sniper she was meant to be, shaped not by the shine of her weapon but by the depth of her resolve. And though she had surpassed them all on the range and in the field, she realized the greatest challenge still lay ahead, not proving her skill but proving her place among them. Days bled into weeks and the training reached a new intensity. Sleep became a luxury, meals a blur, and every waking moment a test of willpower. The instructors no longer barked simple orders. They devised elaborate scenarios designed to break spirit and body alike. The cadets were pushed into swamps at midnight, ordered to march through rain-soaked hills carrying twice their weight, and subjected to surprise ambushes where the only way to survive was to remember every lesson drilled into their bones. Those who faltered were not scolded. They were quietly noted, as if their future had already slipped beyond reach. Elena adapted as she always had, silently, methodically. Her rifle was never far, and every exercise seemed to circle back to it, whether explicitly or not. She treated it as a compass, an anchor that steadied her when exhaustion clawed at her mind. But even as her skill grew sharper, she felt the weight of something heavier pressing down, the expectation of becoming more than just a marksman. She had heard the whispers. Some instructors speculated she might surpass every record in the program if she stayed her course. To her fellow cadets, however, that possibility was salt in an open wound. The resentment simmered beneath the surface, quiet but persistent. One evening, after a particularly brutal endurance march, Elena returned to find her bedding soaked, her few belongings scattered and dirted. No one confessed, of course. No one had to. The message was clear. Whatever respect she had earned on the field had not translated into camaraderie. She gathered her things without a word, wringing out the fabric, cleaning the mud from her rifle. Some of the cadets watched her from the shadows, waiting for a reaction. She gave them none. Silence, she knew, was more disarming than fury. Yet not all the hostility was born of jealousy. A few had begun to see something else in her: resilience, even leadership. One night, as the group huddled around a dying fire after another grueling day, a younger cadet approached her. He hesitated, then asked softly, "How do you keep going when everything hurts?" She glanced at him, seeing in his eyes the same exhaustion that had haunted her for years before the program. For a long moment she said nothing, then finally answered, "Because if I stop, then every hardship I endured to get here means nothing. Pain is temporary. Failure lasts." The boy nodded slowly as though her words carved themselves into him. From then on, he stuck close to her, following her example, finding strength in her quiet endurance. She did not seek followers, but she understood the truth. In a place like this, strength was contagious, and others clung to it like lifelines. The true test came when the instructors staged the most difficult exercise yet, a live simulation of urban combat. The cadets were split into squads, assigned to clear an abandoned village that had been rigged with traps, alarms, and hidden opponents, senior trainees who played the role of enemy combatants. The mission would last 3 days with minimal supplies. "This is as close to real deployment as you'll get," the instructor warned. "Adapt or be eliminated." Elena's squad moved cautiously through the ruins of the village, tension buzzing with every step. The boy who had once led recklessly now deferred more to her judgment, albeit grudgingly. They had learned the hard way that precision mattered more than bravado. Elena guided them through alleyways and collapsed houses, reading the terrain like a map only she could decipher. Twice, they avoided ambushes because of her instincts. Once, when a cadet tripped a wire that would have triggered an alarm, she reacted fast enough to disable it, saving the entire squad from being exposed. But the defenders were relentless. On the second night, they were ambushed in the dark, flares lighting the sky as simulated gunfire thundered around them. Panic spread quickly. Some dove for cover, others scattered blindly. Elena remained steady, her rifle braced, eyes sharp. She picked targets methodically, her shots buying precious seconds for her squad to regroup. Even then, 2 cadets were taken out, their sensors flashing red as they were declared casualties. The loss stung, but it also hardened the survivors' resolve. By the 3rd day, exhaustion gnawed at them, hunger and sleep deprivation dulling their senses. Yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. At dawn, they launched their final push to seize the central building, the heart of the village. It was heavily defended, every window and rooftop alive with opposition. The boy who had once mocked her now turned to her openly, his voice hoarse. "You've got the eye. Tell us how we do this." It was the first time he had sought her leadership without resentment. She studied the terrain, tracing sight lines, measuring angles. Then she laid out a plan, 2 cadets drawing fire along the street while she and another moved through a collapsed wall to flank the defenders. The rest would follow once the opening was created. They obeyed without question. The assault was brutal. The 2 decoys barely managed to keep the defenders distracted, pinned by suppressing fire. Elena crawled through the rubble, her body scraping against jagged stone, until she reached a vantage point overlooking the defenders' nests. She steadied her breathing, sighted, and fired. One by one the defenders fell, their sensors blinking as her shot struck true. With their resistance broken, her squad stormed the building, clearing it room by room until at last the final defender surrendered. When the horn sounded to mark the exercise's end, her squad collapsed in exhaustion, dirt-streaked and hollow-eyed. But they were victorious. For the first time, Elena felt not just the cold satisfaction of survival, but the warmth of unity, fragile, tentative, but real. Her squad looked at her not with envy but with something else: trust. The instructor's verdict was simple but weighty. "You demonstrated initiative, precision, and composure under pressure," one said, his gaze fixed on Elena. "You have begun to understand that a sniper is not only a lone marksman but also a keystone in a greater structure. Remember this." That night, as the cadets sat in silence beneath a sky spattered with stars, Elena cleaned her rifle with hands steadier than ever before. For the first time she did not feel entirely alone. She was still the girl with the outdated rifle, still the one who bore the burden of expectation, but now she was also something more. She had become a part of the whole, not by asking for it, but by proving she belonged through grit and fire. And though many challenges remained ahead, she knew she was no longer walking that path entirely in solitude. The final weeks of training carried a different weight. The instructors no longer shouted as much, no longer hammered orders into the cadets with the same blunt force. Instead, there was a quiet scrutiny in every drill, as though they were watching not just for mistakes, but for signs of what each cadet would become beyond the program. It was no longer about proving strength, it was about shaping identity. Those who remained had already endured the impossible. Now the question was whether they could rise above mere survival and become something greater. For Elena, the transformation was subtle but undeniable. Her once solitary presence had become a steady axis around which her squad unconsciously turned. They no longer questioned her instincts in the field, nor dismissed her advice in camp. Even those who had once resented her came to recognize the discipline and precision she carried. It was not charisma that won them over, nor force of will. It was the unyielding consistency of someone who refused to bend, no matter how brutal the test. Trust, she realized, was not given. It was carved out, day by day, until even skeptics had nothing left to doubt. The final examination was announced without ceremony. "Graduation will not be decided by a written test," the lead instructor declared. "You will not march in neat lines nor recite doctrines. Your worth will be proven in the field, in a scenario designed to test every skill you have acquired. Fail and you will not leave this program as soldiers. Succeed, and you will carry a mark that cannot be erased." The assignment was stark in its simplicity. Infiltrate a fortified compound under the cover of night, bypass its defenses, and retrieve a coded device hidden deep within. Every squad would attempt it separately, but the compound had been designed as a labyrinth of traps, patrols, and obstacles meant to grind down morale. It was not a battle of firepower, it was a battle of patience, strategy, and endurance. As dusk fell and the air grew cool, Elena checked her rifle for the 100th time. Her squad stood ready beside her, their faces pale but determined. The boy who had once dismissed her gave a small nod. "We follow your lead," he whispered. It was not a plea but an oath. They moved like shadows, slipping into the trees that skirted the compound. Elena led them through terrain littered with tripwires and hidden sensors, her eyes scanning every branch, every ripple of dirt. Twice, she spotted danger before it could claim them: a barely visible thread across a path, the faint glint of a buried plate beneath fallen leaves. Each time, she halted the group with a raised hand, dismantled the trap, and pressed forward. Her mind was sharp, her senses honed to a razor's edge. The first patrol came sooner than expected. A pair of guards moved through the clearing ahead, their flashlights cutting arcs through the night. The squad tensed, some gripping weapons, others crouching low. Elena signaled them to hold, then raised her rifle. One clean shot struck the first guard sensor, dropping him instantly. Before the second could react, another cadet, following her example, took him out. No noise, no chaos. Just silence reclaimed. Deeper inside, the compound grew more treacherous. Narrow corridors, abandoned barracks, and collapsed structures forced them into tight formations. The defenders were relentless, springing ambushes from hidden alcoves and rooftops. Each encounter tested their cohesion. Once, when two cadets were pinned by fire from above, Elena climbed unseen through rubble, positioning herself for a perfect angle. One shot, then another, both attackers fell silent. She did not wait for thanks, she simply gestured for the squad to continue. Hours bled together as the mission stretched deep into the night. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, fatigue weighed on their limbs, yet they pressed forward. The coded device lay in the heart of the compound, guarded by layers of defense designed to test not only their skill but their resolve. By the time they reached it, 3 squads had already failed, captured, eliminated, or too fractured to continue. Elena's group stood battered but intact, held together by sheer will. The final challenge came in the form of a heavily defended chamber, its defenders entrenched behind barricades. A frontal assault would mean certain failure. The squad turned to her, waiting for a plan. She studied the room, every angle, every shadow. Then she saw it, a weakness in the defenders' pattern, a blind spot near the ventilation shaft. "I'll go," she whispered. "Cover me. Draw their fire." The boy hesitated. "You'll be exposed." She met his eyes steadily. "That's why you'll make sure they don't see me." They obeyed. As her squad opened fire, rattling the barricades, Elena slipped through the shaft, crawling silently until she emerged above the defenders. From that vantage, her rifle spoke with precision. One by one, the defenders fell, sensors flashing red, until the last scrambled to retreat. Her squad stormed the chamber, seizing the device with a cheer that felt less like triumph and more like release. When dawn broke, they returned to camp weary but victorious. The instructors watched them approach, eyes unreadable. Then, at last, the lead instructor nodded. "You have passed." Foremost cadets, the announcement was met with shouts of joy, tears, embraces. For Elena it was quieter. She sat apart from the crowd, cleaning her rifle as always, though her hands trembled with something unfamiliar, not exhaustion but relief. She had survived every trial, endured every test, and emerged not only as a sniper but as something more, a soldier trusted, respected, and forged in fire. That night, as the campfire crackled and laughter filled the air, the boy approached her once again. He looked down awkwardly, then extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "Without you we never would have made it. You don't just shoot straight, you keep us steady." She stared at his hand for a long moment before taking it. The gesture was small, but it carried more weight than any medal or speech. For the first time in years, Elena felt something lift from her shoulders, the burden of being alone. She had found her place not by demanding it, but by proving it in silence and struggle. When she finally lay beneath the stars, her rifle beside her, she closed her eyes and let herself rest. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new wars perhaps. But for tonight, she was no longer just a cadet fighting for survival. She was a soldier who had earned her place among others, a marksman whose skill was undeniable, and a leader who had never asked to lead but had been chosen nonetheless. And in that stillness, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself the quiet, fragile truth. She had not just survived, she had become. The end.